Africa. The land of a great race, valuable mineral resources, great history, and yet still considered the worst place to live in. Just a perception or an argument backed by facts?
Well, every region in the world has got things which are attractive about it and things which are not attractive about it. There is no region under the sun that is all good, and there's no region under the sun that is all bad. Okay? But it's important that you understand the reasons why certain regions get fairer coverage than certain regions. The factors or the instruments that provide information to a global audience, the media, the internet, okay, global politics, they are all owned by the West.
If you look, for instance, if you look at the 1990 to 99 period, average GDP growth in the region was 2%. And that's barely sufficient, or rather insufficient, to keep up with population growth in terms of improving per capita GDP. Since then, between 2000 and 2009, these growth rates average 6%. So it's almost a tripling of the numbers in a decade. And looking forward, the estimates are that the growth rates for the region for this decade could be up to 8% a year. So that's really a game changer, especially if you consider our objectives as development partners in terms of reducing poverty. Promoting growth is essential in order to reduce poverty, and when you have, for instance, population growth rates that are close to 3%, as in Kenya, you realize that you need growth rates of 6 to 7% or more, even that, preferably, in order to make a significant dent in poverty reduction. So I would say the perception of sub-Saharan Africa has changed significantly, and that it's cause for continued, renewed and enhanced optimism about the work that we're doing with country authorities in the region.
I mean, very clearly there's a difference in the perception of those types of images and what's happening in reality here in East Africa. I think the region itself is a very vibrant place that has a lot of potential. But I think that you need to ask the question, why? Why are those images and why are those perceptions pervading the average culture, society, and global communication? And how, both as a country, do you counter those images? Meaning Kenyans themselves, how do they become global ambassadors to help divert what that inherent perception is about what's happening? So I think that it's a responsibility of every individual to try to change those if that's indeed what reality really is. And then I think it also requires some awareness on the opposite side as well. I think that many people need to realize that we live in an interdependent community and we're more globalized than we tend to think or even know sometimes.
Historically, with manufacture, if I can make this word up, the manufacturization of the society here from the time of colonialism, starting with that, on how to propagandize life here for settlers and colonists. So the picture they painted was already slanted because the view of the people here was racially biased, and that was the picture that they painted. So starting with that, you had geopolitics of the Cold War, which really continued it in favor of Western interests, which impacted those who were, I don't want to say selected, but those whom the West advocated politically here, prior to and upon independence. The picture portrayed was selectively determined by those who were aligned with the Western powers going out here.
I think that when you group us all together, there is also a commonality, in terms of perceptions. Although some groups are perceived more positively than others. And so there's a history in the U.S. behind the negative perception that, of course, dates back to slavery. And, of course, this continent was where all the slaves came from. So I'm assuming that the negativity was the result of both, the continent from which we came and the fact that we were the slaves that built the United States.
It's a mindset that was created as of the end of the 15th century, when Europe was rising up. And one of the deliberate things to do was to create a mindset in which the European is always superior and everyone else is inferior. And out of that you can also see the doctrine and philosophy of racism that comes to be implanted. So what I was saying earlier, that nothing good can come from Africa, that was part of the colonial agenda, has not disappeared. So the skepticism is known. So what are the children in North America, in Australasia, in Europe, what are they being taught about Africa?
Grandpa!
You're not supposed to be up here. Looking at that?
I just wanted to know.
Yeah. Well, you're old enough, I suppose. You should know the story.
Just finished talking about our own media here. How it's, the media in Africa portrays Africa negatively. Yeah? And that's our own media. In part because it is controlled from outside.
I think what you're doing right now, the media, has a lot to do with that. So well, just like here in Kenya, positive stories don't sell. Negative stories sell. So if you can get a negative story, that's what people want to see. And so, you see the stories about the drought. You see stories about civil unrest. You see all these stories about famine and things like that, because that's what people want to see, But if you talk about a university that's educating 5,000 students from 58 different nationalities, and students are doing a great job, and they're going into other countries and excelling, that doesn't sell. So I think a lot of it has to do with trying to get documentaries out, or trying to get increasingly more information out. I think one of the things that's helped Kenya is the M-Pesa story. The fact that M-Pesa has now gone global, or viral as they say, is a real success story. So you see IBM has come in. They've set up over at Catholic University to do training. So you'll find that as more success stories come out of sub-Saharan Africa, that that will change things, and they have to be success stories that fit a global market, like the M-Pesa.
I remember some time as correspondent once mentioned to me that based in Nairobi, that when you write a positive story about Nairobi and you send it to the big networks, it will not track, and you don't get paid. This correspondent will be paid per story. So you have got looking for something bad to say so that you can be paid. It's a part of the system. But this is not the story we want to get from you. So the mindset in the pub, the headquarters of the pub workers, and Brussels, Washington, nothing to be said positively about Africa.
I think, based on my experience of working in African countries, since I started in 1999, has been really the way in which the perception of Africa has changed. When I first joined the fund, there was still the perception that Africa was a slow-growing continent, that the outlook was relatively pessimistic for the region, that the sub-Saharan Africa faced a myriad of problems, in economic policy, social development, political instability. And what I've seen since then is that there has been very significant improvement in most of these areas, and as a result, the perception of Africa has changed radically, I would say. And in a way, I think sub-Saharan Africa has become the new frontier now for investors, and you've seen growing interest for the region.
I think the general things that most people are very aware of are, first of all, the corruption. And second of all, I would think that the humanitarian situation that has plagued the region for the last several decades are the lasting images that are portrayed in the United States or in different parts of the world. So I would think that those two components are what an average person might perceive Africa to be.
Yeah, two issues: the media and education systems. When you go to journalism school, they tell you that the biggest factor that makes news is oddities. When something is odd, it makes big news. When there's a normalcy, it doesn't make big news. So what audiences in the West want to see is the oddities about Africa: witchcraft, poverty, hunger, HIV/AIDS, corruption. Those are the stories that if a journalist sells to the West about Africa, those are the stories that sell. But order, okay, good, prosperity, okay, consistent economic growth, such stories do not sell about Sub-Saharan Africa. So journalists tend to focus more on Sub-Saharan oddities. That is why that story is very popular in the West. So that mindset needs to be changed. Secondly is the education system. In Kenya, by the time I was in Standard 4, which in the West I think they call it grade 4, I'm not so sure, I knew all countries in the world by map, what cities are there, by weather, the kind of people who live there, and I had a rough idea about what is it that they have that is so outstanding as far as their competitiveness is concerned. But by contrast, if you go to the first world, if you go to the States, for example, I've had an encounter with many people from the States who are professors, but they don't even know where Nairobi is. Okay? I've had people who ask which part of Kenya is Uganda. Okay? There's this perception in the West that Africa is one big country.
It's one big country.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I think it is their education system. They need to have a more global-oriented education system that tells them the truth about other parts of the world. Okay? I think they've locked themselves into an ethnic cocoon. Americans know so much about their own country, but they know very little about anything that happens outside America.